right? So I just thought that I'll just seed some thoughts with you guys, right? And you can get back to me in terms of, I mean, you can probably like tell me like what is it that you want to understand more of, right? And we could have a freewheeling chat about it rather than me run you through a presentation which you can probably check out at a later point in time. So as Krishna said, I've worked in startups for about 13 years now, almost exclusively with startups. Was an entrepreneur before this, ran my own firm for about 4 years, did a bunch of things, sales, product, marketing. And over the last 4 years, I would say since 2017 is when I've focused specifically on SaaS. So I work for a company called Vimo. We're in the whole CRM, Salesforce automation space, enterprise, Series B, emergence funded. And so I've had a unique opportunity at Vimo to build the marketing function from scratch. So it was just basically me for a long time. So I had to be everything, right? So I had to be the architect, I had to be the plumber, I had to be the cook, the maid, everything, right? So for a long time. And today, I mean, I think we're probably about 21 people. I still feel that we are very lean, right? Because I think we're all fairly full stack in that sense. I mean, you don't find digital marketers, event marketers, content marketers in our team. You find full stack marketers, like people who can solve a problem with the skills that are required, right? Whether it's digital or events or content or whatever it is, right? I think content is a core skill. Everyone should have that anyway, right? So it's been 4 years in this setup, and I've done the whole like 0 to 1 journey here. So yeah, a bunch of things around like how to generate demand, for example. A brand is something that I'm still learning, right? I mean, I won't be able to tell you unless like we're probably $100 million company and we're worth a few $1 billion, right? So yeah, a bunch of learnings around that, right? I mean, mostly around like how to do the 0 to 1, which I think should be relevant for you guys. The other thing is, aside from the 0 to 1 marketing journey, I mean, um, we focus on enterprise, right? And that's a unique aspect because I don't think there's a single company in India, at least I mean, like I can count probably a handful of them, who um, who have who work with large enterprises, like seriously large enterprises. Like our deals are like upwards of 200k plus, 200k, 250k plus. So we work with the likes of HDFC, FE Credit, AXA, AIA, and so on. Right? These are deployments where the users are thousands, if not tens of thousands of users, right? And it has certain unique characteristics to that itself, right? So these are two things. Aside from that, I mean, any general aspect on startups or whatever is something that I can cover. So any of these three things, if you have questions, I mean, I'd be happy to answer. Okay, Sadhna has a question. If you had to give three success mantra for SaaS sales folks, especially SMB enterprise. Okay. So Sadhna says, if you had to give three success mantras for SaaS sales folks, especially SMB and enterprise, what would that be? Okay. See, again, SMB and enterprise is very, very different. Okay. SMB experience is a see, click, and buy kind of experience, right? Enterprise is a see, meeting. Let me come back after 5 minutes and still tell you that meeting kind of an experience, and a buy kind of, and finally buy, contract, and even after that, I mean, plenty of headache kind of an experience, right? So I think RK is on the call. He'll probably know all this. So so
Hey,
it's a very different,
hi.
yeah. Hey, so it's a very different kind of experience, right? SMB and enterprise. SMB usually you're talking to probably the founder or maybe one level up, one level down, right? So it's a very autocratic sort of a setup, right? SMB usually you're talking to people who not just buy the product but also use the product. The buyer and the seller, I mean, the buyer and the user is usually the same, right? All of these are different on the enterprise SaaS side of things, right? Let me just actually, why don't I just show you the slide itself? So enterprise is a very different beast altogether, right? I mean, it's not, first of all, it's not a see, click, and buy experience. Second, there may be like as many as 8 or 10 people involved in the buying decision, right? So it's not just one person who sees something cool and says, okay, this could be useful, and buys it, right? And it's a very long, complicated sales cycle, right? So not just, I mean, you don't just straight away go to negotiation, right? There's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of process. See, enterprise, the buying process is a process, is a proper process, because they need to have audit and compliance in place to make sure that people don't just spend 100, 200k or 300k anytime they want, right? It can't happen like that. So if you're a salesperson in SMB, it's about velocity, right? In enterprise, it's about focus. Okay. Now, SMB, you disqualify first and then qualify, because it's high velocity. You probably get hundreds of leads, right? Enterprise, you get tens of leads. You don't get hundreds of leads because your universe is finite, right? How many billion-dollar enterprises can you serve? There are very finite billion-dollar enterprises in the market anyway, right? So you can't really, like, treat leads like what do you say? I mean, like how the SMB guy does. But there are millions of SMBs, right? So if I spend equal time on every SMB selling the same way I do, I'll get screwed. Like, I won't meet my quarterly targets. So for an SMB, I need to disqualify first and then qualify, right? So I need to be very, very hard-nosed about, what is my ICP? What is my ideal customer persona? And only focus on the 20% of the actual leads that are really worth my time in the SMB side of things. Now for enterprise, it's a very different story. Enterprise, you have only 100 companies that qualify your criteria, right? And I can talk about Waymo. There are probably about 100 banks and insurance companies in each region that would be super relevant for us, right? Now with these folks, you don't really have an option of like treating them like, there are millions and millions, right? You have to manufacture opportunities, right? Because what you also realize is whatever version of the product that you're selling, they already have something for it and they have a budget for it. They have a process to buy it. They require it, right? So it's really about positioning here, and it's really about like being super focused on the enterprise side of things, right? So let me give you some numbers, right? SMB typically hundreds of leads, right? The person probably has to close, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 kind of customers a quarter. Enterprise, very different. Enterprise, maybe like tens of leads. Person has to probably close 3 deals a quarter or 2 deals a quarter. That's it. So these are two very different mindsets. I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, let me know.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm sorry for the background noise. So I have been in enterprise sales, and when I say that it's a long drawn process for sure when you are
Yeah.
taking the deals through. But is there something specific that's related to SaaS that one has to like
Okay.
just put their head down and just follow that? If
Right.
if
So
somebody say changing their domain from one industry to the other.
see, SaaS specific nuances are the following, right? So first of all, I think all technology is going to SaaSify, right? You've seen that over the last year, especially, right? But the good news for us is the percentage of SaaS as total of IT spend is very, very less. Still probably less than 5%. Right? If you look at a large bank, how much of technology they're procuring, and I'm talking about all kinds of technology, right? Your hardware, your some security infrastructure, whatever it is, right? SaaS as a spend will be probably 1, 2, 3%, I think, right? I may not have the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's that much, right? So this is the ideal sort of space to be in, which is there's a lot of headroom to grow, right? And it's growing rapidly, because then this 3% has a chance to go to 30% very, very quickly, and you can kind of ride that wave, basically, right? See, if you look at the Zomato listing, for example, you can dispute the valuation, but why are people giving such a crazy valuation? They realize that the headroom for growth is huge. It's huge headroom for growth, right? Because what is that food delivery in India is probably at like 6% or 5% of the overall consumption, right? But in mature economies in China and US, whatever, it's close to 40 or 50%, and it's growing. The CAGR, the annual growth is like huge. So again, SaaS is growing some 18-20% every year. That's a remarkable, crazy amount of growth with the amount of headroom that you have, right? So first of all, it's a fantastic space to be in, right? SaaS itself. Now, certain SaaS specific nuances, right? And at the enterprise, this kind of merges, right? I mean, you don't have the, I mean, for lack of a better word, it's not as sassy at the enterprise, because you still have services, you have deployment, you have post sale service, customer success, all of that stuff, right? So it is still like selling, and it is still like buying and selling enterprise software. It's not your what should I say, $100 a month, right? Recurring stuff, right? Where you won't really have annual contracts. You won't really also have like, I don't know what else, right? I mean, you won't have a trial or a POC. You won't do a POC for something like a $5,000 product, right? You won't, unless, I mean, you just have an MVP right now, right? So enterprise is not as sassy as SMB or mid market. Okay, but certain specific things are the fact that obviously recurring revenue, right? But even with recurring revenue, a good salesperson will always find a multi-year contract. That's the ideal. Lock the person in for a 3-year contract. That is the best thing, best of the best, right? The worst of the worst is to have a pilot and have that pilot not convert. See, a lot of the times when I talk to salespeople, right, and salespeople have this sort of a bullish mindset. They always have this. I always say salespeople are like one track mind. Number, 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 number. That's it. They don't give a damn. Yeah, please. You have a question?
It's because I'm a hardcore salesperson. I exactly know what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a feature, not a bug, also, right? And there's, people complain that, oh God, all he can think about is, all she can think about is a number. Like, boss, I mean, if she doesn't think about the number, then there's a problem, right? It's a feature, not a bug. So salespeople are very number focused, right? And oftentimes they'll try to push things through, right? May not be ideal customer persona. Okay, it's fine. There's some potential. Let's push it through. Some cash is coming. Okay, they want to do a pilot. Yeah, let's just push it through. It's okay, whatever, right? But the pain, the real pain is afterwards, right? I said the best of the best is to lock in a customer for a multi-year contract. Let's say 3 years or 5 years. I mean, will be a dream, right? But let's say 3 years, right? The worst of the worst is to have a pilot that doesn't convert, which is like in terms of effort, right? It's like directly opposite, right? In a 3-year sort of a contract, you have economies of scale, you have margins, you have everything. You have everything. In a pilot, it's the worst. It's the opposite, right? You put in a lot of effort for very little money, hoping that it will convert to something else. But unfortunately, I mean, you have to do some of these things, right? You have to do a pilot, you have to do a POC, unless you have 20 customers in the region or whatever, right? Even if you have 15 or 20 customers in the region, I mean, if you're going to the big daddy in that region, let's say, I mean, if you go to HDFC, they will ask you to bloody do a pilot, right? They won't say, okay, I mean, you know what, I'm going to give you this $500,000 contract, yeah, just because I think you look good. No, they can't, right? So enterprise SaaS is less sassy, but there are certain SaaS elements to it, right? Obviously there is recurring revenue, right? Obviously you have to, I think RK can explain more about the contracting and the quote to cash sort of a cycle, right? But obviously, there is recurring revenue. There is the fact that, you have post sale service. One of the biggest, I won't say differences, but like one of the most significant things about enterprise SaaS is the fact that there's a lot of, no matter how much you sold the deal for, there is still a lot on the table for you to take. And people don't realize. See, the really, really, really good people that I've seen in enterprise sales, they never stop selling to the customer. Even if it's a bloody $500,000 or $1 million contract, they'll never stop selling, right? And see, we closed $1 million deal. I think we first closed $1 million deal in 2018, I think, right? 2018 was when we did it. And that $1 million deal is today 1.6 or $1.7 million. For a company that was closing like 100K, 150K, $1 million felt like a lot, right? And you would think that, my God, I mean, how much is there really, beyond that? But the million has gone to 1.6 million right now, right? And it'll grow. And trust me, I mean, it'll grow, right? So usually you leave a lot at the table. And today our $1 million deals will definitely reach 3 million or whatever in another couple of years. I know that. And how does that happen? That happens because the salesperson is still selling to the enterprise, right? Is still understanding what more he can do, what more she can do, right? And figuring out what are the other solution stacks that you can be relevant for. So that is a key significant aspect that I would encourage every salesperson to like really recognize, right? The fact that selling never stops in the enterprise, right? So yeah, I mean, while you don't have this irritating thing about, you know, customers being able to like switch off whenever they want, right? Like, see, for example, I mean, like I set reminders to um, unsubscribe. I set reminders to like sort of like stop some of these subscriptions that are running, right? And I can do it at a one click, gone, right? And similarly, like any of the SaaS products under, let's say, under $5,000 or whatever, or even 5,000 or 10,000, one click and it's done, right? Over. But enterprise is not like that. So that's why I say it's not very SaaSy. It's, think of it as selling software itself, but there are certain aspects like the recurring revenue aspect which is prevalent. But still, I mean, you won't really, you might bill them on a monthly basis, but you will contract always for the year or for 3 years or something of that sort. Right? Sorry, I mean, I think this was a little bit of a detour. So, but I hope this was helpful. So yeah, I mean, since I have the, oh, okay, we have some questions. In one of your PPTs, you talk about changing tactics to influence strategies and not vice versa. Could you give a real life example of this and also some context regarding the station? Okay, this is a good question actually. It's a very good question. So, so here's the thing, right? I'll give you an example from last year. So I'm a big fan of like momentum. Like always have momentum so that then you can optimize, you can figure out what is amazing to do, right? If you don't start moving, then there's no point. I mean, then you will not even realize which direction you have to move, what pace you have to move, etc. Right? So the first order of business, whatever you're doing, is to move, right? So which is why I said, you know, you should let your tactics influence your strategy and not the other way around, because a lot of the times people ask for a perfect marketing plan, right? What happened last year in March with your perfect marketing plan? What happened? Garbage, right? Everything went into the bin, right? All of your perfect marketing plan that you made, like, you know, for 1 month with Excel sheets, and you know, you shaded all these cells yellow, white, and purple, all of that. What happened? Now, you don't need a drastic situation like that for your perfect plans to go out of the window, right? I mean, I've seen, like, I built a beautiful plan for the US, right? And it went to shit. Absolute shit. Right? It happens. Because, see, that's the beauty about sales and marketing, right? You can think whoever the hell you are. Like, I can think Zomato valuation is like really screwed up, right? I mean, it's probably not as high. In fact, I'll tell you, Ashwath Damodaran, who's like the guru of valuations, right, said that Zomato's price has to be $40. What is Zomato price today? $120. Market doesn't care, man. Market is like, it's got a mind of its own. Like, it can make really, really smart people look really, really dumb, right? So all of your perfect plans, I mean, I'm not saying you should not have a strategy, right? You should still have a strategy in mind as to what you want to do, right? And how you should achieve it. You should have an ideal plan, but you should not ruminate over that. You should not be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to take a month to make a plan, and then, you know, 1 month to like test it, and 1 month. No, it doesn't work. Real life doesn't work like that, right? I'd rather like do something, iterate, learn, iterate, learn, iterate, learn, right? So good example of this was like March of 2020, when everyone said you need to make a COVID marketing plan. I said, boss, you have no idea, right, what this thing is. You don't know if it's going to last 1 month or 4 months or 1 year or 1.5 years as it is now, as it is now, you know, as it's now lasting, right? You have no idea. How can I make a plan when I have no variables defined at all, right? And I don't know if this is going to be new normal, whatever, right? I was using these terms way before anyway. So you don't know all this. So how can you make a plan? I said, let's do one thing, right? It's obvious to me that people obviously will have more time, right? So let's focus on two things. Let's focus on content and let's focus on webinars, right? Now, content we're not strong at, right? We're still building that muscle in Vimo for a variety of reasons, right? So we said, okay, you know what? Let's do webinars. And usually, marketing folks make a big deal about webinars, right? They take like, I don't know what it is, like probably they do 2 webinars a quarter. That's a huge thing. Oh my God. Crazy, right? I mean, 2 webinars a quarter. Guess how many webinars we did? I think in, last year. Like since March, I mean, how many webinars did we do? Take a wild guess.
I don't know, 150.
Boss, please. I'm still alive, huh? After 150 webinars, I mean,
One a week?
around 30. We did about 30 webinars, right? Probably more. 30, 35 webinars or something like that, right? So there's a certain amount of learning you get from doing things very, very quickly, right? Iterate, learn, iterate, learn, iterate, learn, right? And that has taught us a bunch of things. And guess what? I mean, this year, how many webinars have we done? We've done five, four or five. I can't remember, right? Now, if I come with a perfect plan and I come with this mega event that I'm going to do once in 3 months, what would I have learned? I wouldn't have learned jack shit, right? So sometimes you have to let your tactics influence your strategy, which means get off the ground, run something, do something, and then let it inform your strategy, right? Let the market tell you, you know, what you have to do, really. So I don't know. I mean, I thought that was a relevant example. Uh, Sonam says, as a marketer, when you're setting up a new team at an enterprise SaaS company, what are the top priorities in the first 90 days? Maybe, okay. Yeah, so I have a presentation for this. I can probably. I hope this is the latest one. Let me just check.
Roshan, I think we have a follow-up on whatever you just said. How would you justify the ROI for these iterations?
No, yeah, see, that's the thing. You cannot justify ROI for jack shit. I'm telling you. See, the thing is that marketing managers, I shouldn't say this, but marketing managers suck. Okay, they want this like beautiful looking like Excel sheet which says that, you know what, I run this, I'm going to get like, I'm going to get 100 registrations, and 100 registrations will become like, you know, 20 opportunities, and 20 opportunities, 5 wins will close, and you know what, amazing, like I can go and show this. It doesn't work that way, man. And what do you care? Like, what do you care really? Like, so for example, like, see, you should have a fair idea of like what your CAC or CAL is, right? I mean, what your cost of acquisition for a lead or this one is. But you understand in your head that, you know, I mean, you're going to run this the way you have to, right? I mean, you're going to do what it takes to I mean, like, move the needle, right? See, some of the things that we did, like some of the most low ROI things that, like, I'll tell you, some of the things we had no idea will have any ROI. I mean, it's impossible to define like ROI for a branding event, for example, right? No idea at all. Like, what can you say that the ROI will be? Because it doesn't translate to sales. So what marketing folks generally do is default to the lowest resolution of it, which is what, I'll run LinkedIn ads, I'll spend this much, I'll get this many leads, and whatever. This performance marketing types, right? Which is fine, which is okay. But then you will be stuck along with the rest of the 99 other percent of the people who are doing the same thing, right? Some of the best campaigns I've run are the campaigns I had no idea what the ROI would be like. See, if you've done something before, then you have a fair handle on, you know, what the ROI can be, right? I mean, estimated number of leads and how many of these leads will turn to opportunities, all of that stuff, right? We've probably done 150 events in the last 4 years, right? I can tell you today, like if I just look at an event brochure, I know whether, you know, it's a good event to participate or not, for a variety of reasons, right? And yeah, fine. I mean, you can even argue ROI on that and whatnot, right? So okay, I pay $10,000, I meet probably 15 people, and these 15 people are within my prospect list, and all of them are decision makers. Okay, this much, whatever, right? You can do that. And also, I mean, to be fair, right? Again, in the enterprise, your CAC can be pretty significant. Like, it can be big, right? See, if I'm closing a $200,000 deal, how much can I spend on cost of acquisition? I can spend a lot more, right? I mean, I don't have to like nickel and dime on my cost of acquisition yet, right? If it's a $200,000 deal, my CAC, cost of acquisition, can be $5,000 also if I want, or $6,000 also, right? So I don't really have to nickel and dime. So this question, I mean, people will take offense if, you know, I mean, they are selling $100 product or something, right? But for me, I mean, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. If I close a 6-figure deal after spending like 30,000 also, it's fine, totally fine, right? So anyway, to get back to the ROI question, right? So I would say, if you've done something before, have a fair handle in terms of like, you know, what is the estimated ROI, right? And estimated ROI, you could do variety of modeling, right? I mean, you could probably do you know, estimated number of meetings or leads and opportunity. What is the typical conversion from your leads to meetings, meetings to opportunities, etc., right? And then what percentage of opportunities will close to wins and so on. So have a fair handle on all these numbers and keep revisiting these numbers so that you don't get any surprises, right? And then probably like do some bit of modeling based on that, right? I'm not saying like go cold and tell your boss that, okay, you know what, I think so, I think this will be amazing, so I'm just going to do it types. Don't do that, right? So still like go ahead and do a little bit of modeling just to keep people happy or whatever, but in your heart of hearts, if you think that something is going to work for logical, commonsensical reasons, go and do that, right? Don't, please don't invest too much in a Excel sheet that's going to show that you're going to get all these beautiful things after you like do these things. Okay, so
So this answer was from a marketer's perspective, but from say a business owner's perspective, how does it work? Because it's not very easy for you to just give a free hand to marketing and say, hey, I know you can't give me say numbers, but try it out. Let's see what happens. It can't work that way.
No, correct. So you can't do it for all the 100% of the stuff that you do, right? I mean, see, like for example, I mean, I do this for about, I do it for the most of the things, but okay, I mean, 20-30% you can, right? And it's always like, you also have to earn that place. Like if it's the first campaign in the first company in the first month of your working, right? I would say please don't do this kind of stuff, right? Be humble, learn from people, and like I'm saying this after like some experience of seeing what works and what doesn't, right? You know what I mean? And even now, I mean, I just don't go and like tell people like, okay, it's intuition, or that something came in my head and it's a dream and whatever. You have to go and sell it, boss. I mean, you're a marketing person. Why don't you go and market the shit out of the campaign or whatever it is you want to sell, right? You have to make a good cogent point. For me, what I've realized, the 10x ideas really come from first principles thinking. It's from coming, hey, you know what? I think this could be good. It doesn't come from a very linear sort of a mindset of, okay, you know what? I'm going to put LinkedIn ads and I'm going to get this many, whatever, which you should do, right? Which you should do. Like, I'm not, like, I mean, if people on my team were giving me this spiel, I mean, I would have a different answer to them, right? You should think it through, obviously, right? But don't be afraid to revisit some of these things, is my humble opinion.
No, I agree. And I think more than just, going through frameworks and just talking the marketing language, I think it's all about ICP grooming, right? And in the broader sense of managing stakeholders from a business standpoint, right? So it doesn't have to be a top of a funnel activity and brand it as marketing. Overall, it's just about managing stakeholders within your ICP and influencing them towards your product at the end of the day.
Yeah, see, I do plenty of, like, I'll tell you, I mean, I'm just thinking about it, right? I do plenty of low ROI things, like on paper, low ROI things. Like, I don't need to get on a customer call, right? Why do I need to get on a customer? Every marketer pretty much like thinks like this, right? I mean, my job is to generate leads and to probably give. Especially at my level, I don't need to get on a call, right? Customer call. Why do I get on a customer call? Right? I'm front-ending a couple of opportunities also. Who needs all of this tension, man? If it closes, great. I mean, it will not even be my quota. I'm not even carrying a quota on that, right? But why do I do that? I do that so that I don't have to go through a salesperson and understand what the customer is thinking, right? As marketers, all of the information that you have is second-hand, right? You're getting it through the sales guy. And you know this case of Chinese whisper where one person says something and the other person says something else. In the case of like salespeople especially, salespeople hear what they want to hear. Always. Right? They're notorious for this. They'll come and tell you, hey, you know what? Customer wants this and this, whatever. Right? And so, I mean, again, it's a very low ROI activity, right? I don't have a quota. Why should I get on calls? Why should I take the tension of bloody, chasing customers and like running opportunities or whatever, right? Right? See, and the other thing about being on these calls, I mean, salespeople know that I can catch their bullshit, right? They can't bullshit you. I mean, salespeople always treat marketing folks as this idiot cousin of theirs, right? Always do. What does this guy know? I mean, this guy sits and bloody writes some stuff on his laptop. That's it, right? We are the guys who are going and getting like, all the stuff. Always. And it's true. Most marketing people have no clue about their customers. No clue. You just randomly pick a marketing guy and ask him when was the last time he talked to a customer. Like actually talked to a customer. Not through, survey forms and, LinkedIn campaigns or whatever. Actually talk. They don't. So here's the thing, right? You're designing all these campaigns, beautiful stuff, for someone you have not spoken to. Is there a problem? Like hell yes, there is a problem, right? So don't be afraid to do all of these remaining 50% stuff, right? Hopefully you don't get fired. Yeah.
I can read that for you. So if you're setting up a new enterprise team, what should you be doing the first 90 days? What should be your priorities?
Yeah. Okay. So I had this presentation on how to think about the 0 to 1 journey, right? And I spoke about the 0 to 1 journey on multiple fronts: what team you should hire, what campaigns you should run, what metrics you should chase, so on and so forth, right? So I just run you through a few slides, and hopefully that will seed some ideas. Again, like, I'm not giving you information, I'm giving you ideas, right? If you have questions, let me know, and then we can dive deeper into that, right? So I always think about this journey as momentum, efficiency, and scale, right? The first part, what I mentioned, was momentum, which is like, first start running. Like, first start running, then we'll figure out the speed and the direction, right? First you figure like if you can run or how you can run. That's it, right? So on this, in terms of the team itself, I will think about it like this. Like, day 0, I will hire generalists. Like in 2017, 2018, my first few hires were all generalists, right? And they're still with us. Touch wood. You never know with this market, huh? But anyway, I mean, they're all still with us. Thank God for that, right? And they've all grown tremendously. Why? Because on day 0, you have no idea what campaigns work, what skills work, nothing, right? You have no idea about that. So if, let's say, for example, let's say on day 0, I hired this kick-ass digital marketing guy, right? And I figure that digital is probably like, I don't know, it's a less optimal medium, right, for me at the beginning or whatever, right? I'm not even linked, not even digital here. I mean, today, I mean, people specialize to the extent of PPC marketer, right? What is a PPC marketer, man? What is a PPC marketer, right? So let's say you hired this amazing PPC marketer, right? And you figured that PPC is like suboptimal for you, and you ask him, boss, I think this PPC thing is shit, right? Why don't you run some events? What is his first reaction? I don't know how to do it, or maybe, whatever else, right? So which is why, I mean, your first few hires, right? Always believe that generalists are the best, right? Because you don't know what will work for you. Hire these generalists, throw them at the problem, and guess what? All of the people that we hired are right now full stack. Anyone can do anyone's job in Vimo marketing, basically, right? And so then you start understanding, what works, what doesn't work, and then you move towards efficiency, where then you start hiving off things, right? So one of the things that we did really well, right, is to have a product marketing and sales enablement function. We call it the go-to-market function, right? Why? Because 2017, 2018, I think probably like the first 6 months of my joining, all I was doing was decks and docs and decks and docs and decks and docs, and that's it, right? Content. Like, we have this meeting, I need a deck. We have that meeting, I need a deck. We have this, whatever. That's all I was doing, right? And even up until 2018, a huge percentage of what marketing did was sales enablement, right? But then we realized, okay, you know what? I mean, there's enough in this work stream to kind of hive it off. So today we have a go-to-market function that specializes on all of the product marketing, sales enablement, right? And the full stack also. So they don't just like give you content, they also configure your demos and whatnot, right? So they don't just write about wealth banking. They can configure a wealth banking demo for you. So they have developers working with them, right? Think about that. So that is efficiency, basically. And then when you scale, I mean, I would love, for example, in 3 years' time, I know that it'll happen, right? Where some things are centralized with us, but you will have a sort of an Indonesia marketing team, you will have a US marketing team, you will have a Japan marketing team, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how I think about momentum, efficiency, and scale, right? And again, so like, this is fairly self-explanatory in terms of like ACV is average contract value, and then time, right? Who do you have to hire when, basically? And depending on your sort of whether you're enterprise or SMB or mid-market. Obviously, higher ACV is enterprise, lower ACV is SMB or mid-market. So on day 0, for instance, a product marketer would be most relevant for an enterprise, right? And the lower the ACV, I mean, a digital marketer would be more relevant for them, so on and so forth, right? I mean, you can reorder this, but I've just sort of logically put this in a stack. Again, so team done, campaigns. So if I were to ask you what is the job of a campaign, right? Most of you would say, I mean, to get leads, right? But that's like That's the end result, right? When you're doing the 0 to 1, you need to know what ingredients go into making a fantastic meal. Not just the fact that you have a meal. See, I can order anything from Swiggy these days, right? Literally anything. I mean, like whatever, 40 different cuisines, right? But if you ask me to recreate that in a non-Swiggy environment, I'm screwed. Just because I have like a wonderful pasta in front of me or like some Tair Sadam in front of me. I mean, Tair Sadam is easy, but anyway, right? Whatever pasta or whatever in front of me, I don't know how to recreate it, right? And that's really what happens when you say that, okay, I need leads. Fine, you get leads, but how did you get those leads? Why are people responding? What are they responding to? When are they responding? How are they responding? So in the 0 to 1 journey, figuring out these things becomes super, super important. You need to be able to find product market fit, right? Finding product market fit, I'll tell you, marketing is a force multiplier, right? Your salespeople have one-to-one conversations. You can amplify to hundreds, if not thousands of conversations, right? And in this journey, finding that product market fit is your first primary job. Then when you have, like for example, right now we know use cases, we know who the decision makers are, etc., right? Then it's the question of efficiency. It is like, all this CAC and CAL and things like that, right? Which is like, how much of my MQL is flowing into SQL, how much of my SQL is flowing into, marketing qualified lead is flowing into sales qualified lead is flowing into opportunity, how much of opportunity is closing into, how many opportunities are closing, etc. All of these percentages. Then you start tweaking the percentages, then you start optimizing it, right? And ultimately at scale, you want to be in a point where, okay, you know what, for $10 million of revenue, I need to probably invest, $500,000 or 1 million. You need to know how much money you need to invest, what campaigns you need to run, and how these leads and opportunities will flow, right? That is at scale. And see, the thing is that you don't have to think about it at scale. You can do these things like beforehand, right? It's just that you will have to reorder the priorities a little bit, right? So you need to think, you need to get to that point, right? That is the absolute, I would say North Star for you, right? So you don't have to wait until you're a, $100 million company to think that, okay, you know what, I need to get serious about all of this stuff. No, you don't have to, right? A lot of these things, the earlier you do some of this, the better for you. But don't get sidetracked by that, right? Your first primary job at particular instances of this journey has to be that, whether it's momentum, efficiency, or scale. Oops. Yeah, this is another thing, right? See, the thing is that people come and ask me, they get very annoyed in these presentations that, I don't give them the secret of, how they can generate hundreds and thousands and millions of leads, right? And usually, I keep a very clickbaity title, like, how do you generate your first 1,000 leads? And they get really irritated, right? So they come and ask me, what channel, what campaign, and I can tell you what worked for us. But that will be guess what? That'll be zero useful for you. It'll be absolutely useless for you, right? Because so how do you decide for yourself? You decide who's relevant for you, basically, right? What does she care about? Where does she exist, right? And how should I reach her? Now, how can I know this about you? If I were to say some dumb thing, okay, probably run LinkedIn ads for, I don't know, dude. I don't know your ideal customer persona, so I don't know what channel. I can abstract from those characteristics and give you a general idea, but you still have to do the hard work, right? You still have to do the heavy lifting as such. So figure your channels, figure your campaigns for yourself, right? Yeah. I love Nassim Taleb, so I just sprinkle his quotes every once in a while. Plus it makes it seem profound, so yeah, there's that. I don't like Drake, but I like this meme, so yeah. So yeah, okay. Should I continue on this, or I could probably take another question if you have.
Yeah, Roshan. Actually, we have a couple of questions dropped in.
Okay.
Viral had one.
Are there learning from the traditional software companies of 3 which are relevant for enterprise? Yeah, there are, for sure. See, when you say traditional software, I'm going to assume Infosys, TCS, Wipro, those kind of guys, right? See, they do a bunch of these things that are amazing, right? They do a bunch of things that are crap that you should run away from, right? Like investing in branded pens and diaries and whatnot, right? Don't do that. Please, that's not marketing. Leave that aside. But they do a bunch of things that are really, really Really amazing. Like for example, go and read up about how they, or talk to people who can manage analyst relations, right? Fantastic skill. Like I'm talking to a guy from TechM, couple of folks actually from TechM. I'm talking to one more guy. I forgot what, but he's worked for a large company, right? So I talk to these guys to understand how they manage analyst relations, right? So for us, we probably have like as marketing SaaS marketing guys or whatever, we have one quadrant that is relevant for us, right? But guess how many quadrants that are relevant for a guy in, let's say, tech chem? Can you guess? You have to multiply industry vertical into the specific use case into geography. That's how many quadrants are relevant for the person, right? Something like 20-25 quadrants are relevant. It's an insane task. It's an insane task to be relevant on 25 quadrants, right? So if I have to manage like probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 analysts, the guy is managing like 200 analysts, right? If I have to manage, I don't know, I mean like maybe, what should I say, about 10 briefings, or 10 is a large enough number, maybe like 6 briefings a year, the guy is probably managing 6 briefings a month or 4 briefings a month, right? So it's a humongous skill. It's an amazing skill to have, to learn from these folks, right? The guy who has probably done analyst relations at Infi or TCS or whatever. So yeah, so analyst relations is one of the things that you could definitely learn from these folks. Other than that, I'd be hard pressed to think of anything else, right? See, SaaS has done a wonderful, we've done a wonderful job of learning from first principles, being relevant for the customer, right? But it's just this bullshit frameworks thinking that gets in the way, man, always, right? I mean, they want a ready recipe for success, which is always like, I mean, I have no good things to say about that, basically. But yeah, so to answer your question, Daryl, I think analyst relations is something that for sure you could check out, right? Okay, a foreign enterprise B2B sales professional from the e-commerce sector who's looking to move to SaaS. How open are SaaS companies to hire non-SaaS folks? Oh, very open. A lot of JD says,
I'm one example, guys.
yeah, exactly, right? As a SaaS leader, recruiter, what grooming, learning you think non-SaaS? See, don't make a big deal about SaaS. I know, I mean, this session is about all things SaaS and everything, but honestly, like, think of it as business, right? Another nuance of business, right? Tomorrow, I mean, if there's something else that's going to come up, you don't want to specialize in that, right? So don't worry too much about the sassiness of a particular space or whatever. Yes, there are certain characteristics of it, and that characteristic will impute a certain amount of skill set that you will require, whatever. But I would still say, go front and center with your skills, right? I mean, so a great salesperson will be relevant anywhere, right? What is it? I mean, it's not like you're going to send one product all your life, right? For 30 or 35 years or whatever. You'll be selling like, tens and dozens of products. So just think of it that way. And I'm like, I don't even ask. I mean, these days actually I disqualify people if they're coming from SaaS background actually. Because they'll come in with all that framework and principles, and that guy will write a blog about what he spoke to me also. And like, enough. Like,
Thanks, Roshan.
serious. Yeah. Not you, Krishna. I mean, you write good blogs, but it's like the LinkedIn influencer types, right? I mean, I found a dog dead on the road today, but was it dead? Here are 5 things I learned. I mean, like, dude, please. it's like that basically.
Roshan, I had one question for you.
Yeah.
Again, this is again related to all your experience last year and also continuing this year in terms of doing online events, right?
Yeah.
How have you seen the effectiveness of online events versus what we used to do more in person, have cocktails after stuff? So,
sucks.
Sorry?
Yeah. It sucks, I said. Headline is that it sucks.
Yeah, but I know for a fact that at least B2B kind of thing, it's more very touchy and feely kind of events.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what really works, right? Where you exchange business cards, probably have lunch together, sign some of those deals. So I know I'm going too old school from that standpoint, but I think some of that is still relevant,
No, it is.
right? Because
you're absolutely right.
Business, at the end of the day, people to people kind of connect, and then everything follows.
Yeah.
Now with online events, you can make it as jazzy as possible, But how do you think how do you think it's going to go going forward? Because what I see, all this new normal or hybrid normal, whatever is happening, there are few things where probably people are not going to travel every single time unless it's really going to be really, really business critical and important. So how do you think this is going to pan out for B2B business in general and B2B SaaS in specific?
So I didn't want to be too subtle, so I'm going to say it as it is, right? So I've probably said this half a dozen times in the time that you took to ask me the question. Online events absolutely suck. Like I hate it. I absolutely hate it, right? Because you cannot recreate the physical event sort of a thing, right? You can never recreate that. And funny things happen, man. I mean, really funny things happen on virtual, right? I mean, so yeah. I like Sadhana's okay, there's like so yeah, I mean, see, virtual, I'll tell you one advantage is that we have a lot more top of the funnel. Obviously you can't do like as many events in the physical world as you do on the virtual. And virtual, what do you require? I mean, you don't really require anything. It's cheaper, right? A lot more people show up. I don't know if it's people, because who knows, right? I mean, like people do show up, whatever, but it's way less effective, way less effective. And see, events are not just again, right? I mean, you don't have to default to leads and opportunities. Events are fantastic channels for you to learn about your customer, meet your customer, all of that, right? I mean, nobody's going to, at least in the enterprise, it's very, very difficult for me to foresee a situation where people don't meet people and then buy a product, right? I mean, yes, I mean, Zoom and this and that, whatever, but enterprise, I mean, it's always about trust, right? The person really has to look you in the eye, like do a firm handshake and then probably sign off on that, right? I mean, it doesn't happen otherwise. Really doesn't happen. So yeah, and it's fantastic channel to learn stuff, learn from your customers. Because see, typical event, like if it's a good event, you'll end up talking to hundreds of people, hundreds of prospects. So yeah. So you have these conversations and whatnot, and you learn so much, man. You learn to perfect your pitch, right? You learn what really matters to your prospects or customers, and then you build relationships. You build amazing relationships from these events. I have relationships from 3 years ago that I've, I met a few people at events, whatever, that I still know and I still talk to them, right? So you can't recreate that physical event atmosphere in a virtual event. Virtual event will give you scale, but quality is very, very low. Very low, like super low. So I'm really annoyed about virtual events, although we have done well on that front. Okay, hard stop. It's a Saturday morning. I can continue. I think I have Japanese class in about, when do I have? Yeah, it's at 11:30. So yeah, I still have about 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, Roshan. So I just have one question.
Sure.
So if you look at the enterprise markets, right, when we try to scale, when we move to one other geography, one other territory, and there is all these variables involved, right? So you have a different ICP, the product behavior might change, my end users might change, the cultures might change, and we are selling around, say, a $500,000 product or a 300K product, right? How about you navigate this when you get into this new market? So how do you figure out what's going to work? Of course, there should be some iteration involved, but would you recommend, how can someone go about exploring a new market and hitting that first set of customers or gaining those first set of customers within a short span of time, right? Yeah. Any suggestions there?
So it's a good question, right? Essentially, your question is around go-to-market, right? So suppose, I mean, if I were to explore a new region, like how do I, what do I do, right? See, so it's a half and half. Some things you know, some things you don't know, obviously, right? And what do you know? You know certain things about your product itself. Like I'm assuming it's a mature product, right? I mean, let's say, I mean, you've been around for a while. So you know what your product does. You know who your typical market is like, right? Now, when you enter X, Y, or when you choose to enter X, Y, or Z regions, you don't just show up there and then try to understand the market, right? You pick that market based on similar characteristics of what you already have. Let me give you an example, right? India has field sales people. Indonesia has field sales people, right? India has a developing market. Indonesia has a developing market. India has banks and insurers. Indonesia has banks and insurers, right? So then you will assume that, okay, you know what? Probably Indonesia could be a good fit for me, or Philippines or whatever it is, right? So first you pick your market based on similar characteristics of what your product market is today, right? Now, one of the things that I've realized is, and we've done this go to market in like 4 or 5 different geographies, right? Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, US. I'm missing one other, but whatever, right? So we've done this, right? So the first order of business for you in these new markets is to maximize the conversations that you have. Just maximize conversations. I mean, it could not even, it doesn't have to be prospects. It doesn't have to be people who buy your thing or whatever. Just maximize conversations, right? When you like have these conversations, when you have like long form conversation with someone, you understand a bunch of things about a market, right? That you cannot find in reports and blogs and whatever else. You can't. You simply can't, right? I'll give you an example. For instance, right? So Indonesia, a lot of these banks and insurers and whatnot, they're all controlled. In fact, any large business is controlled by about 7 or 8 of these families. They have large families in Indonesia, like the Tatas and the Ambanis type, and they're all controlled by them, right? And these guys, they actually invest in companies. They invest in startups and whatnot, right? So as a Tata, if I've invested in a particular startup that's giving a particular service or a whatever, right? So I would prefer that the bank that I own will use that product. That's basically it, right? So that's an insight that we never could have read anywhere, that we never could have got in a blog or report or whatever else. You couldn't get that, right? So maximize these conversations and go with what you already know, but be open to learning, right? So it's not like we went in Indonesia and then we said, you know what, let's explore pharma and retail and medical equipment, whatever. We didn't say that. We said, you know what, we've sold to banks and insurers before. Probably we should stick to that. Let's sell to banks and insurers. But am I open to selling to a large pharmaceutical firm if it so happens? Maybe. But that's not my go-to market. My 99% of the effort has to be in the familiar territory of financial services, because I have sold in financial services, right? And then you realize a bunch of these things. And again, it's about conversations and so on. Don't have to over intellectualize it. It's like very, very simple. You have these conversations. The market will tell you what they want. Really.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think there are no further questions. So I hope this was useful, guys. I mean, I just wanted to keep it more interactive rather than run you through a boring slideshow, and bore you with it on a Saturday morning, right? So I thank you again for the opportunity. I mean, it was super helpful for me to learn about you guys and what. Didn't get to talk to a lot of you today, but the questions were super insightful. Helped me think about things. So switch host, please. I've done that. You can contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or actually, you can probably take my number or something from Krishna. Happy to have a chat. Okay. All right, guys. I think that's that. So thank you so much again, and look forward to connecting with all of you offline, and shoot me any questions that you guys might have. Happy to answer them. Yeah. Cool. Krishna, you're going to run an NPS survey and all of that after this? Or you're going to write a blog about this?